This video makes historical references to religious and ideological groups. It is not intended to offend or malign any community or faith. As readers know, my original book was about a well-known quote of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah that turned out to be false. This single quote has influenced everything, from the education system to the academia, and even constitution making in Pakistan. In fact, the first time it was ever used was in a meeting of Pakistan's first Constituent Assembly, during an intense debate over the country's ideology. But what is the ideology or idea of Pakistan? Where did it come from? And why do Pakistanis care about it so much? It is fair to say that during the 1940s and up until the early 1950s, ordinary people were virtually unanimous on what the Pakistan idea meant. So let us begin by outlining the Pakistan idea according to the overwhelming majority of people during that early period. In the 1940s, the Muslims of India believed Pakistan would be a place where they would be given better opportunities to live as free people and to flourish socially and economically. They believed that these opportunities would be available not simply because they would be a numerical majority, but because the law of the land, being based on Islamic principles, would guarantee it. It would mean equality and freedom for everybody, regardless of caste or creed. Whether or not anyone today believes that Islam can actually make this guarantee, there can be no doubt that this is what the masses believed, and to a large extent still believe. This was the collective dream of most Pakistanis while Mr. Jinnah was alive. They saw him as a great Muslim leader who had founded a nation-state. In this video, we shall look at the source of the dream, because dreams, and especially collective dreams, have to come from somewhere. In the case of the Pakistan idea, we can find its traces in the unique history of India. India is a vast land of ancient cultures and communities, and the home of many religions. Muslim conquerors first arrived in India in the 8th century. The first sultanate was established in the 13th century, and afterwards various Muslim empires ruled over India for around 500 years. The last and largest of these was the Mughal Empire. European traders arrived 800 years after the Muslims. The British East India Company gradually defeated all other European commercial competition, and by the 18th century it also established political power and afterwards conquered much of the subcontinent. Meanwhile, the Mughal Empire grew weaker due to constant wars with its Hindu rival, the Maratha Empire, and other internal problems. A combination of religious and racist prejudice of the new British rulers created resentment among Indians, and in 1857, Hindus and Muslims together attempted to fight back against the British and save the Mughal Empire. But they failed, and both the Mughal and Maratha empires collapsed. After the rebellion, the British Crown put an end to company rule and took its place. The rule of the British Crown, known as the British Raj, began in 1858. The British Raj treated India as a single country and introduced territorial or secular nationalism, which in theory at least ignores religious differences in creating a national identity. For Europe, a separation of religion from politics had laid the foundations of the modern West. But for Indians in the 19th century, it was a new concept, brought in by a foreign culture with an entirely different history. The policies of the British Raj conflicted with the realities of both the history and geography of India. It was a subcontinent containing many distinct cultural communities, each with social traditions rooted in their religions. The two largest communities, namely the Muslim and Hindu empires of the previous 1,000 years, had consciously built entire civilizations around their respective religious identities and ideals. So it's not surprising to find that from the very beginning, some Hindu and Muslim thinkers insisted that their respective peoples were not communities, but nations coexisting in a subcontinent. The question was whether they could coexist peacefully. Indians may have disagreed on whether or not they could form one nation, but they all wanted to secure better rights and a rightful share of political power within the British Raj. The Indian National Congress was formed initially for this purpose, but later it changed its aims and fought for complete independence. Inspired by the secular ideal of equality, it claimed to represent all Indians. But some minority leaders felt that the Congress only really represented caste Hindus and could not adequately represent all Indians, which is why political groups such as the All India Muslim League and the Depressed Castes Federation were formed to stand up for the political rights of their communities. As the independence movement gathered momentum after 1920, these parties focused their efforts on getting safeguards for their communities in a free India. While the Congress was fighting to get freedom from the British, it was also borrowing from British colonial ideas. The Congress wanted Indians to unite as a single nation and treated India as one country. However, this was very difficult to achieve in a land where the majority were extremely poor, uneducated, and socially backward. The various communities lived side by side, yet they were also socially and economically divided by a caste system that had existed for centuries. It didn't help that from among the Hindu nationalists, the far-right ideology known as Hindutva was playing a role in fueling communal tensions. Partly taking their inspiration from the Hindu empires of the past, the Hindutva movement aimed to subdue other national identities in the subcontinent in order to create a purely Hindu India. Muslims, meanwhile, were fighting both for India and for themselves. Despite being a technical minority, they tried to negotiate for an equal share of power in a free India. But by the 1930s, Muslims felt increasingly insecure. Their leaders were unable to get the constitutional safeguards they wanted. Muslims and other minority groups blamed both the caste system and a growing Hindu far-right for fostering political and social discrimination and creating civil unrest. By 1940, Muslims finally rejected the minority label and declared themselves a nation, and this was the start of the Pakistan movement. The supreme leader and advocate of this two-nation theory was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He accused the Congress of duplicating the British colonial model of democracy, that is, of willfully ignoring the historical and geographical realities of India in order to turn a subcontinent into a country, its nations into minorities, and thereby create a Hindu Raj by sheer force of numbers. He also argued that the only way to get freedom for the whole subcontinent and to put an end to India's civil crisis was for everyone to accept that Muslims were not a minority but a nation, and to allow them to have a country of their own if they wished. The idea of Pakistan was bound to inspire the Muslims of India. It was faithful to their experience of history in the subcontinent, as well as to their spiritual outlook. They dreamed of a country that would offer freedom and equality to all its citizens based on Islamic principles. And most importantly, they understood that in Pakistan, they would take control of their own destiny. It was their collective dream. The Muslim League campaign lasted 7 years before all parties finally agreed to partition India in August 1947 and create 2 new countries, Bharat and Pakistan. At the start of this video, I mentioned that while Pakistan's first founding father was alive, ordinary people were virtually unanimous on what the Pakistan idea meant. It was only after Mr. Jinnah's death that a minority of Pakistanis became more openly critical of the idea. They had always seen it as a national myth, a propaganda line to rally Muslim voters. This minority belonged to the educated and privileged elite, and with time their views came to influence academic, political, and public opinion. Views over the Pakistan idea, and indeed Mr. Jinnah's ideological stance, soon became sharply divided. And this is where the story really begins. We will talk about this minority view of the Pakistan idea in part 2, where we will also introduce the main groups involved in the debate, the argument for a secular Jinnah, and how this argument changed and became more persuasive with the introduction of the MUNIR quote. Thanks for watching, and until next time remember, words are all powerful.